This paper builds on a book that I published a couple of years ago, and in it, I argued in part for moral rationalism, but it was primarily on the basis of research in psychology. What I want to do here is to look in detail at neuroscience, and I argue that it supports the same view that moral judgments are essentially dependent on reasoning, not emotions, at least if we conceive of those as distinct from reasoning or inference. And the argument proceeds in two related steps. The first focuses on domain general reasoning, and I want to draw on a number of different brain imaging studies, which suggest that there are a few key players, key brain areas that crop up when we look specifically at moral judgment. And these areas, I want to argue, are involved in just general reasoning capacities that we apply outside of the moral domain. So the three that I would focus on are the prefrontal cortex, the amygdala, and the temporal parietal junction. And so just take the TPJ, for example. We know that it's heavily involved in understanding the mental states of other people, including their intent. And that, of course, is really important for moral judgment, understanding the person's intention behind their action. Now, contrast that with brain imaging studies on emotions and the neural correlates of those. And you can see that it's really kind of all over the place and doesn't map on very well to the kinds of areas that we see consistently involved in specifically moral judgment. And the second step is related. Here, I focus on the idea that neuroscience does seem to be suggesting that the distinction between reason and emotion in the brain is a bit dubious. The two are at least entangled. This is based primarily on research with patients who have brain damage, patients with, in particular, psychopathy, or somewhat relatedly, acquired sociopathy. But what we see in both of these cases is that these patients do have deficits in their gut feelings, and those deficits lead to trouble with decision making, but not just decisions about morality, it's decision making generally. And so we get a picture coming out of the neurobiology that gut feelings, or sometimes called affect, are crucial for making decisions and reasoning. But I argue that this is good for rationalism. Just think about the opposing tradition of sentimentalism, which has always argued that morality is like aesthetics or judgments of beauty. It's special and requiring emotions to make those kinds of judgments, unlike other kinds of cognition, like making judgments about math or language. They would draw a sharp distinction between those two. But the rationalist tradition would argue precisely that if gut feelings are essential to moral judgment, it's only because they're crucial to reasoning generally.